Ladies and gentlemen, it's very unusual for a Whitlam Oration to begin with a medical bulletin. But I did want to apologise for my lack of voice. I can assure you I'm not contagious. I can assure you I don't have COVID. In fact, how many politicians or former politicians can say they have returned a negative RATS test on 8 occasions in the last 3 days? But ladies and gentlemen, to more serious issues. Our annual Whitlam Oration is a centrepiece of the ongoing work of the Institute, where we are inspired by Gough Whitlam's dedication to cause and change during his long lifetime of engagement in political and civic life. My role this evening is simply to warmly welcome you all. I acknowledge the many distinguished guests who have joined us from the Diplomatic Corps, those who have served or are serving in federal, state and local government and in the Australian judiciary, my colleagues from Western Sydney University and the Whitlam Institute, and of course members of the Whitlam family. In particular, of course, I welcome Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his partner Jodie Hayden. We are very honoured the Prime Minister will be our 2023 Whitlam Orator. In a moment, Catherine Dovey, who represents the Whitlam family on the board of the Whitlam Institute, will introduce the Prime Minister. But now it's my great pleasure to ask Ngunnawal Elder, Auntie Violet Sheridan, to welcome us to country.
I feel tall. It is my pleasure to be here tonight. As a long admirer of Gough Whitlam, I'm really honoured to be here to perform a welcome to country for the 2023 Whitlam Oration. Gough Whitlam was a Prime Minister who had an unwavering commitment to the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Gough's passion for Indigenous rights was evident in his statement that Indigenous peoples had been denied their basic rights to pursue of happiness, to liberty, and indeed the life itself. Since colonisation, Gough was committed to the land rights and also introduced the policy of self-determination. Gough supported decisions making by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples themselves. This commitment to self-determination is echoed in the Albanese government, which also recognises the importance of self-determination and the need to close the gap. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in our country, acknowledging the resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in sustaining the world's oldest living culture. The Prime Minister and I are both South Sydney supporters. But I'm hoping we do much better this year. Next year, I mean. But I stand in this place where once my ancestors before me stood, raised their families. I am a proud Ngunnawal woman as I carry my ancestors in spirit, walking into the future, teaching the next generations about the oldest culture in the world, my culture, the Aboriginal culture. I'd like to pay my respects to my elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people here this evening. But I'd also like to acknowledge our Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese, Jodie Hayden, partner, and members of the Whitlam family. It is my pleasure to once again to welcome you to the land of the Ngunnawal people, my mother's country. My father is a Wiradjuri man, but I follow my mother's bloodline. I'd also like to acknowledge any other ministers here. And I only say this in Canberra because my heart is broken. My heart is broken. I'm hoping it heals soon. I've got 28 grandchildren, which I worry about for the future. Will they have a voice when they grow up? Will this gap ever be closed? And I only say this because Canberra support us with the yes vote. But it's been my pleasure again to be here tonight. But you know what I'm happy is that we have a Labor government in power that cares about people. We have a Prime Minister in power that cares about people. And where to from here? We're open for guidance from them. Thank you so much. God bless.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Dovey, the youngest of the Whitlam children and the only daughter. My role tonight is to introduce the Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese, to give the 2023 Whitlam Oration. First, however, I would like to very much thank Auntie Violet Sheridan for that welcome to country. As a revered Ngunnawal elder, it was no doubt challenging for her after recent events. Like many of those here tonight, I share acute disappointment in the recent referendum outcome. At least we can take heart from the result here in the ACT. What can one say other than there is much work to be done? Fear not. Unlike my father's acknowledged tendency to prolixity in any public address or even in a simple introduction, this will not take a long time. Certainly, Father never wasted an opportunity to offer rich historical context, an abundance of shared knowledge and free-flowing advice. It would also usually would feature his great sense of humour, invariably exercised at his own expense, one of the finest in the political cavalcade of Australia. For example, he once spoke of his selection of rowing as his sport at university, saying, "It is of course an extraordinarily apt sport for men in public life because you can face one way while going the other." Frankly, I miss all of that. Father's knowledge, his grandeur, his courage, and yes, his wit mattered to our country. His legacy is imprinted on the Australian nation from his commitment to serious policy reform on many fronts, including of the ALP itself, and his ardent commitment to the social, intellectual and creative life of our nation endures in Australian history. One way in which that impact is recalled and marked is in the delivery of the Whitlam Oration. It is now a central component in the program of the Whitlam Institute, where a distinguished speaker is invited to offer a thoughtful contribution which stimulates debate about matters of moment in contemporary Australia. The Whitlam Institute, housing the Whitlam Prime Ministerial Collection, was established by agreement between Western Sydney University and my father in 2000. My father loved the creation of the Whitlam Institute. He thought it had vital work to do, and this public oration was an event he hoped would continue long into the future. Nothing would give him greater pleasure than a Whitlam oration being delivered by a serving Labor Prime Minister. So now to the point of my being in front of you. Anthony Albanese has many things in common with Dad, not only in being the leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party and having won office from opposition, something done by few in Labor history. The Prime Minister also has a deep commitment to this region and relationships in Asia, New Guinea and the wider Pacific, matters always dear to my father's heart. He too has an unwavering focus on policies committed to the betterment of our society and the settings and aspirations for its people. Whether in foreign affairs, social infrastructure, health, education, social services, or matters devoted to justice, the arts and Indigenous rights and welfare, Gough Whitlam and Anthony Albanese truly share a unity ticket. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister of Australia, our Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese, to deliver the Whitlam Oration for 2023.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for such a warm introduction. And I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting this evening. And I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I thank my mate, Auntie Violet, for that wonderful welcome to country. To parliamentary colleagues, distinguished guests who are here with us today. To the Whitlam family, including Catherine Dovey, Nick and Tony Whitlam. To all of Gough's distinguished former friends, it is wonderful and a great honour for me to be here today. I know Barry Unsworth, the former Premier of New South Wales, is here as well. Welcome, Barry. Men and women of the Whitlam Institute and Western Sydney University, it is a great honour to follow the many distinguished Australians who have delivered this oration, beginning with Prime Minister Julia Gillard back in 2011. Gough famously warned us against assuming he was immortal, but this event is just one of many ways in which he remains eternal. And tonight I want to hold true to the overarching principle and unifying theme of Gough Whitlam's public life, his great watchwords, contemporary relevance. Because while Labor has always been a party enriched by our history and inspired by our legends, our mission is the future. We measure ourselves in government by the difference we make to the country and the people that we serve. And that is why 50 years ago this week, when reflecting on his first year in office, Gough spoke of promises fulfilled and reforms begun. A typically elegant formulation, and also a useful way of thinking how every Labor government sets about building a better Australia. The delivery of our commitments here and now, reinforced by the pursuit of long-term reform for lasting change. The continual and evolving challenge for us is to bind them and balance them, to deal with the pressures that are in front of us in a way that builds for the opportunities ahead of us, to engage with the urgent responsibilities of getting costs down for families, getting wages up for workers, and getting the budget onto a stronger foundation, while planning and building for an economy, an energy grid, a workforce, a health system and a region that will look fundamentally different in the decades ahead. A responsible and reforming government can't treat these as alternating tasks or sequential ones. You have to embrace both and manage both. You can't say, oh, we'll get around to the future when we've dealt with the present. Because the way we deal with present challenges must both anticipate and create that future. That's the purpose and urgency that drives me and my colleagues across our 4 key priorities. Firstly, relieving the pressure on families. Secondly, strengthening Medicare. Third, a future made in Australia. And fourth, securing our home and our place in the world. In all this, to draw upon a favourite Whitlam theme, we do not view our democratic mandate as permission to preside. We see it as a command to perform. As I told our caucus on our very first day in the government party room, after 9 long years at the other end of the hallway, we're not here to occupy the space. We are here to change the country. Of course, that task is rarely easy, swift, or uncontested. The way of the reformer is hard in Australia, as Gough Whitlam said. But that's also how you know it's a job worth doing, because hard work is what endures. Substance is what lasts. The patient, sometimes painstaking, challenge of making meaningful change. Change that empowers people, lifts their living standards and nourishes their aspirations. Change that brings people together through shared opportunity and shared reward. Change that prepares our nation to compete and win in the world as a resilient, skilled, productive, renewable energy superpower. Change where our prosperity and security is built by Australians shaping the future, not waiting for the future to shape us. This means clearing away a legacy of waste and neglect. It means moving away from thinking only about what can be avoided by isolation, defeated by division, or delayed by inaction, and embracing a bigger view of what can be achieved through cooperation, purpose and resolve. This begins with our first priority, helping Australians with the cost of living. Our government will continue to do everything we can to responsibly support people who are under pressure. And through this year, we've delivered cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, over 214,000 fee-free TAFE places, energy bill relief for millions of households and small businesses, and new investments in the social safety net, with more direct support for the most vulnerable Australians, including single mums. We are going to keep working to bring costs down for families, but we're also working to get wages up for workers. After a decade of economic architecture where low wages were celebrated as a deliberate design feature, I'm proud to say that last quarter produced the highest quarterly wages growth on record. It also marked 2 consecutive quarters of real wages growth. And at this event, in honour of the Prime Minister who reopened the equal pay case, I am proud to say the number of Australian women participating in full-time work is at a record high and the gender pay gap is at a record low. Proof that our support for a strong minimum wage, our actions to promote secure work and gender pay equity, and of course our historic 15% pay rise for aged care workers is making a difference to wages and to lives. Just as importantly, far from wages growth acting as a handbrake on job creation, we've demonstrated through practicality that the two can go together. Over 620,000 new jobs have been created in 18 months, the most by any first-term government in Australian history, and we're only halfway through. The balance we're striking in all this is important. Our efforts to take pressure off people have been carefully designed to not put pressure on inflation. And today's figures show again a promising sign. More to do, but inflation moderating at the same time as wages are growing and jobs are being created. Cheaper childcare is a good example of why we prioritise that. Yes, it's valuable help with the family budget, but it's also an economic reform that will boost productivity and participation of women and give working parents more choice and flexibility. And it is education reform as well. To quote from Australia's most famous policy speech, early education is a means of equalising and enriching every child's life. That's why our long-term goal is making early education and care universal and affordable for every Australian family. Taking pressure off inflation also depends on putting the budget on a stronger foundation, building a buffer against current and future uncertainty. The responsible approach that Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher have led has enabled us to turn what was a $78 billion deficit into a $22 billion surplus, the first surplus in 15 years. Our second central priority is strengthening Medicare. Of course, this helps with the cost of living, but for a Labor government, Medicare will always stand as a pillar of its own. Through 2023, we have been opening our 58 Medicare urgent care clinics in growing suburbs and regional communities right around Australia. New facilities providing peace of mind to families by improving access to medical services outside of ordinary work hours, free of charge. All you need is your Medicare card, not your credit card. So you don't have to go to an emergency department to get the treatment that you need. The clinics we've already opened have seen 75,000 presentations. Nearly 1 in 3 patients have been under 15. Nearly 1 in 3 visits have been on weekends. On weekdays, more than 1 in 5 visits have been after 6 p.m. This is a practical service that recognises the time and cost pressures on modern families. And it's always important to make the point that diverting these cases is better for hospitals and better for healthcare workers too. At the beginning of this month, we delivered the biggest investment in Medicare since it was created, a tripling of the bulk billing incentive that will make it easier for 11.6 million Australians to see a GP. As Gough said, promises fulfilled, reforms begun. But of course, more to do. A key priority for 2024 and beyond will be recruiting and retaining more GPs, nurses and healthcare workers right across Australia, as well as working with National Cabinet to take pressure off public hospitals and secure the future of the National Disability Insurance Scheme so that it can continue to deliver life-changing outcomes for future generations. Without Gough Whitlam and Medibank, there wouldn't be any Medicare. A great reform and just part of the legacy that we celebrate and we honour here tonight. The third key theme of our government is our approach to a future made in Australia. I mentioned before that the budget surplus acts as a safeguard against international instability. It's just one vital element, but an inescapable lesson of the supply shock driven by the pandemic, reinforced by the global energy market consequences of Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine, is that Australia's long-term economic security depends on much more than budget responsibility. It means strengthening our position in global supply chains, revitalising our local manufacturing capacity and the skills of our workforce so we can move up the international value chain. The National Reconstruction Fund we took to last year's election and legislated this year is central to this. And tonight I'm pleased to announce that the Minister for Industry, Ed Husic, and the Minister for Finance, Katie Gallagher, have officially signed off on the fund's investment mandate. This means from tomorrow, the NRF is open for business. Money in the bank, ready to invest in new jobs, new skills, new technologies and new industries, ready for us to make our future here. And so many of these new opportunities will of course be powered by renewable energy. The first time the Parliament sat, we wrote our new 43% emissions reduction by 2030 into law. The entry ticket to meaningful engagement with other nations, in our region in particular, and a signal to the world that Australia is the right destination for clean energy investment committed to cutting emissions and creating jobs. Achieving this goal depends on a whole host of interconnected initiatives across the economy. Our safeguard mechanism supporting industry to adopt new technology is part of it, and so is rewiring the nation, upgrading and modernising the national energy grid so clean power can get from new projects to Australian homes and businesses. For a decade, whether it was rooftop solar or large-scale projects, Australia's move to renewables was happening in spite of the Commonwealth Government, not because of it. At every turn, technology was being held back by ideology. Economic opportunities were being undermined by political opportunism. We are turning that around. Last week, we announced that our government is prepared to underwrite 32 gigawatts of new electricity, 9 gigawatts of storage, and 23 gigs of generation. That is the equivalent of half the entire East Coast's electricity use. We're working with investors to reduce the risk because we want more Australians to share in the rewards. Above all, we understand that this moment of environmental necessity presents us with an unprecedented economic opportunity, the chance for our critical minerals and clean energy to take us to net zero and to power a new generation of local manufacturing. Not just exporting the raw materials for things like batteries and solar technology, but making that technology here ourselves, unlocking the export opportunities of green hydrogen to help economies in our region industrialise and decarbonise at the same time, and using green hydrogen to make green metals and green fertilisers. The biggest economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution is underway. The global race for new jobs and opportunities and prosperity has already begun. This contest will not be defined and decided purely by the size of a nation's economy or the scale of its investment. We must play to Australia's strengths and build on our comparative advantages, from resources to research. That means making sure that Australians have the skills and knowledge they need to seize these new opportunities which are on offer. That's why we're rolling out 300,000 more fee-free TAFE places from next year and an additional 20,000 university places, as well as opening new regional study hubs and TAFE centres of excellence, bringing the opportunity of education as Gough Whitlam envisaged was so central to opportunity, to Australians in regional communities and growing suburbs, breaking down the barriers of disadvantage and distance, preparing more Australians for opportunities in clean energy, digital skills and the care economy. Making our future at home also depends on ensuring more Australians have a secure home. Gough Whitlam's great passion for urban renewal was driven by his resonant belief that every Australian had the right to a roof over their head in a community served by decent infrastructure. It recognised individual aspiration, but it also identified government responsibility. It's in that spirit that we brought together National Cabinet in August to agree on the most comprehensive set of housing reforms in a generation, a new national focus on a better deal for renters, agreement on our Help to Buy scheme, which we will introduce into the Parliament tomorrow, lifting the ambition of our National Housing Accord to 1.2 million new, well-located homes before the end of the decade, and securing a national consensus on new initiatives that will help us meet that goal, speeding up approvals and unlocking more land for construction near public transport and good services, because essential workers shouldn't have to commute an hour both ways to provide those essential services. And as we grow our national housing supply, we are making long overdue investments in renovating and building public and social housing around Australia. All of this driven by an enduring Labor understanding of the security and dignity and opportunity that a home provides. It's more than just a place to live. It's a sense of stability, connection to community, and a base from which you can aspire to a better life. Because if you want that famous definition of equality, where every child has a quiet room to study in and a desk with a lamp to read by, that starts with a roof over your head. And in 2023, of course, something Gough didn't envisage, the child sitting at that desk needs the National Broadband Network. Which is why we've created a program to provide free broadband to up to 30,000 families with school-aged children who can't afford an internet connection. Now, Rome didn't go from brick to marble in a day, and it took time for Gough to see the suburbs fully flushed. But we're acting with purpose because the need is urgent. And through next year, you will see a power of work underway on more homes for Australians in the cities, suburbs and regions alike. The fourth fundamental priority for our government is securing Australia's place in the world. We do this by investing in our capabilities, but also investing in our relationships. Thanks to the outstanding work of Penny Wong and Richard Marles in particular, Australia is back at the table as a constructive middle power. We have turned our alliance with the United States to face the future, deepening our cooperation through AUKUS, but also on critical minerals, cyber, science and innovation. We have launched a comprehensive set of initiatives to invest in and engage with the rapidly growing economies of ASEAN. We are re-engaged in the Pacific as a partner, an equal, a neighbour and a leader, including, I'm proud to say, the groundbreaking climate and security agreement we have struck with Tuvalu, the most significant act of Australian diplomacy since our support, through Gough Whitlam's vision, for the independence of Papua New Guinea. And earlier this month, I travelled to Beijing and Shanghai to mark the 50th anniversary of Gough Whitlam becoming the first Australian Prime Minister to visit the nation whose economic rise he foresaw. The latest step in the patient, calibrated and deliberate way we are working to stabilise our relationship with China, an approach that has helped secure the release of Chang Lei, an approach that has removed trade impediments for our farmers, producers and exporters, already in barley, hay, coal and with wine back on track. Between January and August last year, Australia exported $85 million worth of those products to China. The same period this year, it was $6 billion. By the end of this year, estimates are it will exceed $10 billion. Our approach to China is to cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, but engage in our national interest. It is true that what happens on the world stage matters to Australia, but our region is no mere theatre, and we are not spectators. What Australia says and does on the world stage matters too. It matters for our neighbours, for our region, for our security and for our prosperity. It matters that Australia is there, engaged, represented and invested. Gough Whitlam understood that, and so do we. I conclude tonight by saying that if I was not born an optimist, I was certainly raised as one. I was brought up to believe that in Australia you could aspire to anything. And I don't think my mum would necessarily have taken her instruction on that from the John Curtin Memorial Lecture that Gough delivered back in 1975. But my earliest political memory is of her joy in 1972, where the message to a young boy and the message in our neighbourhood was really simple. We won. We won. Because she understood the difference that Labor governments make to people who really need Labor governments. It's not academic, it changes lives and creates that opportunity. And I stand here today as a son of the Whitlam Government, because without the opportunities that Whitlam created, there's no question in my mind I certainly wouldn't have had the opportunity to get the education I did and to be the 31st Prime Minister of Australia. Gough, of course, made a version of a similar point. He said that the essential choice in politics, going all the way back to the revolutionaries in America and France, was a choice between basic optimism or basic pessimism. The conservative worldview, the pessimistic mindset, treats change as a force to be feared. We see that very much with the current opposition, an opposition that has learnt nothing from the past and offer nothing for the future. An opposition determined to define themselves only by what they are against. The fundamental flaw in such an approach is that in the end it is always self-defeating because it offers no path forward. It presents no ideas for the future, and it places no hope in the people who will shape it. It promises only a desperate last attempt to cling on to the habits and fears of the past. For the optimists, for the reforming side of politics, for a government committed to economic and social progress, change is always an opportunity to be seized. Our optimism isn't naivety. We don't underestimate the challenges confronting our economy or our environment. We don't downplay the complexity of the global strategic environment. And I want to thank all the members of the Diplomatic Corps who are here, particularly from all of our region. You give me and Gough Whitlam a great honour in being here tonight. We don't doubt the significance or the stakes of the transformation underway in clean energy and technology. But we believe, absolutely, in the ability of Australians to meet the demands of the future. That's what drove Gough Whitlam in 1972, and that's what has driven us in 2023 and will guide us in 2024. Those key priorities: relieving the pressure on families, strengthening Medicare, a future made in Australia, securing our place in the world. These are our priorities. They are our command to perform. So we look forward to 2024 with a sense of determination and optimism. Promises fulfilled, reforms begun, with more to do and ready to do more. Thanks very much.
Prime Minister, thank you for the passion and the powerful oration this evening. I'm Barney Glover. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of Western Sydney University and a member of the board of the Whitlam Institute. It's a proud moment to be here beside the Australian Prime Minister. An oration very much in the Whitlam tradition. Prime Minister, it was great to be here. Your particular references to the challenges of reformist governments and the importance of change, celebrating as we are at the Whitlam Institute and Western Sydney University, a series of 50th anniversaries of the Whitlam Government, beginning as we did last year with Senator Penny Wong's oration in Blacktown, a masterfully traced journey through foreign policy from the Whitlam era to the present day and outlining the challenges and opportunities of our region. I commend you, as you mentioned, Prime Minister, in your speech, your recent trip to China to meet President Xi Jinping, but I can personally attest to the high importance placed on your visit by the Chinese. You didn't know this, Prime Minister, but I was asked to do a live television interview on Chinese TV just before you arrived, along with a Chinese expert, a little bit antagonistic to Australia, and an American commentator. The connection being that the Whitlam Institute was here on the 50th anniversary and your trip coinciding with that 50th anniversary. But in the few minutes before the live-to-air interview began, the very prominent Chinese interviewer wanted a tutorial on how to pronounce your name. So I spent some time on Albanese, and I think I've contributed to bilateral harmony because of that. They got it right throughout the interview. But it just demonstrated how important that was and the proximity of your trip to that 50th anniversary celebration of the historic Prime Minister Whitlam trip in 1973. Now we're approaching 2024, another noteworthy milestone, the anniversary of the double dissolution election, the subsequent joint sitting of the Australian Parliament we'll celebrate in August next year. Electoral reform, and you mentioned Medicare, universal health care in this country, a great Labor reform. Medibank created and the precursor to Medicare. Historic and difficult reforms, generationally and multi-generationally significant to our democracy. You're building on that as you outlined in your speech, Prime Minister. From the pouring of the sand by Whitlam to Vincent Lingiari to the voice referendum, reform is difficult. We're proud at Western Sydney University that just in a few days' time, Prime Minister, we're going to announce the winning design for our Indigenous Centre of Excellence to be constructed on the banks of the Parramatta River in the unceded lands of the Barramatical people of the Darug Nation. It will be the most significant building committed to First Nations higher education ever on Australian university campus. And it will begin an opportunity through forums led by our First Nations leaders in our community for a dialogue and self-determination in higher education, and led by our Chancellor, Professor Jennifer Westacott, how we can have a voice for our Indigenous people to our university. The journey continues, Prime Minister. Your speech this evening touched on crucial issues impacting our nation. Contemporary relevance was part of your theme, planning for the future, universal childcare, universal learning with TAFE places, and I'm sure the Accord will deliver a universal learning entitlement. Your priorities, the National Reconstruction Fund that you announced is up and away tomorrow. It was in 1971 that Gough Whitlam announced there should be a university in Western Sydney. We come full circle to those opportunities. Prime Minister, thank you once again for presenting the 2023 Whitlam Oration and for your inspirational words, your thoughtful reflections, your passion. Please join me in thanking the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Anthony Albanese, for the 2023 Whitlam Oration. Now, Prime Minister, this is an extraordinary gift from the Whitlam Institute. This is an original It's Time T-shirt from 1972, signed by Gough Whitlam. This is a rarity. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, and thank you again, Prime Minister, for a truly powerful and remarkably important oration. My name is Professor John Jurians. I'm the Director of the Whitlam Institute within Western Sydney University. On behalf of the Board of the Whitlam Institute and the Honourable John Faulkner, our Chair, it is a privilege to offer a few closing remarks and to bring the Whitlam Oration to a close.
The Whitlam Institute is a policy and research organization and a Prime Ministerial public museum that commemorates and is inspired by the life and work of one of Australia's most respected Prime Ministers, the Honourable Gough Whitlam ACQC. It pursues the causes he championed and is guided by the principles upon which Gough Whitlam's parliamentary career and years of service to the people of Australia were founded. Prime Minister, upon achieving 100 days in government, you spoke of the great privilege, the great opportunity, and the solemn responsibility of government to put your government's ambition for the country into action. Now, at this juncture, we thank you for your government's vision and energy in taking the challenges of today as you build the opportunities of tomorrow. On behalf of the Whitlam Institute and Western Sydney University, we thank you all for attending the 2023 Whitlam Oration, the pinnacle annual event of the Institute. Thank you also to the National Press Club of Australia for hosting this oration. Lastly, please travel safely home. We look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Thank you and good evening.